picked off in terms of that openness and vulnerability in that relationship. And that was hard, but then the best thing ever, because then you're like, oh, now I can nurture that part. Now I can talk to her and look at her and, like look at things from different perspectives. And so I share all of that only because when you gave that framework, I'm like, yeah, I can see how, and then you start to learn more about what helps their younger self feel even more nurtured. And it's like this very beautiful, but it has to be a conscious dance. Like you mentioned, all the things in all the world and all the stuff can be pulling at us, but we have to really be able to like stay solid and grounded and connected. So those are really powerful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and that it really supercharges vulnerability, which increases intimacy. And then that gets us into the third part that we work with, and that's sexual, I like to call it rediscovery. So it's a process of ditching all the conditionings, all the imprints, all the narratives of what we're told sex should be, especially in long-term partnerships. It's going to get vanilla, it's going to get and then that gives
I hate
couples.
that story. That's
I
not
know
my story, Melanie.
it is not my story, that's for sure. So this gives couples the opportunity to start rewriting and recreating what their love, sex, and relationship story is. And then we get to dive into sacred sexuality, really bringing in the feel, the want, the tone, the passion that they want in partnership and in sex. And then they get to start creating their own rules and make their own dialogue of what sex is. And I guide couples in sacred practices, really teaching them. I teach everybody 12 holistic sex tools that every human has the ability to use, but they're usually never taught. And this stuff has to be taught. So that vulnerability that you do in the emotional intelligence upgrade really supercharges the pleasure in the final sexual discovery part of the container.
Could you share like 2 of the 12 tools?
Yeah,
Or
for
like,
sure.
yeah, just like a couple, like from that tool belt.
Yeah.
There's a lot. So I don't want to go through that. And if somebody wants to work deeper with you, then of course they can. But what are a couple?
Yes. Well, breath is definitely number one. So if you are focusing on your breathing, if you are breathing into your sex organs, you can't really get lost in thought. So it's a supercharged way to up level your pleasure fast. And it's so quick because I even still find myself like lost. And like the other day I was kind of writing my husband and I'm like, oh, what's next on my to-do list this afternoon? And then I was like, whoa, hold on a second.
Come back.
So come back. And so the quickest way for me to come back is to follow my breath. So I take a deep breath in and I send that breath with my mind all the way down, filling up my pelvic bowl. And then that awakens and creates sensations in my whole pelvic bowl. And then I am immediately right back into this delicious pleasure train that we're riding together. So breath work is always one. If you find yourself in thoughts, you can't be thinking about some thoughts and actively focusing on your breath at the same time. It doesn't work.
I love breath work. Like I got certified to coach it, and I do to certain clients here and there, but mainly because I wanted to learn for myself. I love that was the first one that you mentioned too, because you just can always come back to your breath, always, anytime, no matter where you are, no matter what. And just the different feelings and sensations and places you can go. And sometimes I like can't feel my extremities and I'm like, where's my body? And I just love the journey that we can go on. Sober, nothing, nada, breath work on a little of an empty stomach, even better. And I just love that light lifted feeling. It feels so, oh my gosh. Yeah. So coming back to our breath always is available.
And you can, like you said, you can do a breathwork practice where you have a breath energy orgasm by sending your breath down to certain areas, by breathing, like a connected breath, no pause between the inhale and the exhale, sending the breath directly into maybe your cervix, maybe your clit, and you just keep breathing in and circulating that breath, circulating that energy, and it can just supercharge your whole experience and then leave you lit and vibrating kind of throughout the whole entire day. So juicy.
Awesome. Yes. And that's like literally complete opposite to how most people are living day to day in this stress, fight or flight, not focusing on conscious connected breath and connecting breath flow to sexual organs and, having these like, and so sometimes people think, I can't ever, it's like, I can't do whatever. It's like, but you almost can't not, because you're living in such a tight knot of stress, everything that, being in touch and in tune with our body is such a gift, such a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just for another one, if your audience is curious for more, movement. So really letting go of what you think your movement should look like in sex and following the instincts of your body. So even you just supercharge your body with breath, and then you allow your body to move, to flow how she or he wants, or they, and just let that body move. So I know that sometimes I get in the like, okay, it's like hip thrust, forward, back, hip thrust, forward, back, hip.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I connect to like actually what my body desires, sometimes she's a swirly whirly. Sometimes she's like a side to side rocking motion. So letting, especially women, letting our hips free, letting them move how they want. It just can really unlock new levels of pleasure.
Yes. And that movement and that for those of you listening, of course you can't see it, but for you watching, you can, of like that movement side to side and around and our hips. Like just to go tell, on what you said about like back in the day when your grandparents got divorced and those times, whatever, it's like that was considered like dirty and not good. And I remember when I was a kid, I loved it too. And I was so good and I was young. Well, whatever, it doesn't matter. I did Polynesian dancing where you have the grass skirt, and I was like, I got super good, right? My dad comes to one of my events. It was his first time coming, right? And he was like, oh, hell no, you're done with that. Like no skirts, no shaking your butt, right? And I have a good relationship with my family. And, in a gentle way, I've said to them like, dang, you were like, so like, why wouldn't you let me do that? That was traumatizing. I loved it. You took me away from it, Dad, like in a joking, fun, loving way. There was some ways where he was just so like conservative and rigid. And I remember being like, just, yeah, so good. And in that flow, and I could do the grass skirts and all the things. And I loved it. But yeah, in some cultures, it's like beautiful in a form of dance and expression. And then in some, it's like, don't move your hips. And you're like, wait, what? But they move. They go in all these different directions. Like it's just so bizarre that a certain part if I circle my arm in a circle, it doesn't matter. But just like that area being so like, taboo, and then I think of that story too. I'm like, oh man, we need to move our hips.
Yeah, it's really systematic repression of female being, of femininity, of our divine birthright to move, to express, to shake, to, and shaking is one too. Allow your hips to shake while you're receiving pleasure. Ooh, that's a whole nother experience. And how many of us actually kind of have the consciousness to open our hips up to do that. So it's a really beautiful process that anybody can actually just do, laying flat on the back, knees pointed to the ceiling, feet on the floor, and you just let your hips shake on the floor.
Okay.
And then you're actually releasing so much held, stored trauma in our hip area. And it could just be for like, put on a sexy song and kind of just like bounce on the floor.
Okay. So like in that position, like you would do like a bridge or something in yoga. So knees bent, feet flat, and then lifting your hips just a little bit up and down and tapping it. And I have a really thick yoga mat at my house that I use here. So I feel like that would feel good, like that cushion and just that pressure on that spot on your body. Okay. So you just like listen to a song and do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll notice at the beginning, it's kind of like a forced, like you might even just go with a pattern with the beating. And then a minute or two into the song, like your body kind of takes over. If you really allow her full expression, if you allow your movement to liberate, and then just kind of see where she wants to go, how she wants to move, your knees maybe even flare open. The way you hit the floor could like get super fast and super short, or it could get super long and super sensual. Just allowing your body to open up and move the way that your body wants to move, and then honoring it without judgments and shame from all the stories that we've been told.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that would feel good too. That area of my body, I also like to be massaged the most, like that lower back into your glutes. Like I always feel like that area of my body likes to, be nurtured. And there's like a lot of recovery and muscles that I use a lot from hiking and just doing all of that. But Definitely going to try that for sure. Definitely
Awesome. Yeah.
noted.
Let me know how it turns out.
Absolutely. Um, I want to talk a little bit more about like communication within couples, especially surrounding like sex and intimacy and things like
Mhm.
that. Um, I remember I shared this in my course too, on my NABA course, but I dated this guy. We're still great friends too. So I have this, well, we'll talk about that in a different light, but with him specifically, we struggled with certain areas of that. And I just want to like, keep the details private because he's also
Mhm.
involved in it too, right? So anyways, there was a lot of discussion and me trying to connect and conversation and can we talk, you know, I told you a little warrior spirit. Sometimes I'm standing up, he's sitting down. I'm like trying to demand and like just so many misses in communication, right? The
Mhm.
best conversation we ever had, the most honest we ever had. And also then that was like the beginning of the end of our relationship or like our romantic relationship. But it was when he was laying on the couch watching tennis. I had learned a lot more about body language and communication and mirroring and matching. And like, you don't want to stand over someone if you're trying to have a connecting conversation. Like that sounds like, you're being punished, right? So I'm like laying on the couch, chill vibes, start to have these conversations. And then he starts to reveal to me that like he's not romantically interested in me anymore. And that like he, feels more like sister vibes and like, and now it all makes sense because now we work together. We do so many cool creative things together. It's just we're brother and sister. Duh. He saw it before I did. Right.
Mhm.
But in those moments where it's like, hard to connect. And I know there's a lot of like body language involved, like timing, like, do you coach on like, because I
Mhm.
mean, you can't just come home and then be like barking what your needs are once you start to figure out what your needs are. So, like, what's that dance? And I think people listening probably too, they think like, okay, yeah, I do want to speak up on this. I do want to, there's an elephant, right? We need to like address, but I want to do it in the best way that then's going to like keep it juicy and drive connections still. So like, what could that look like? And, not that I want people to get that answer that I did. I want them to be more drawn in their relationships, but getting the truth and getting to the, of that
Mhm.
is still special, even though that was the answer I got.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good question. So I love to guide couples in setting up sacred spaces. So first of all, you're totally right. It matters about the environment, about where each person is coming from. So I would say first set a time. If you are like me at all, we've got 4 kids, so it's like the time really has to be it aligned right where they're not going to interrupt us, where we have privacy. I do love conversations out in nature. Nature kind of has this ability
Yeah.
to lower the stress. So you are connected to actually what we're supposed to be doing in life, and that's being connected to nature. So I love conversations outside. And then I would guide couples into using those tools. So holding space. I really love sitting across from each other. So if you need like pillows, you can set them up in like a living room, have some candles, have some nice music. And then you begin the conversation with your intentions. So my intentions are to communicate with you in a loving, safe, sacred space where all emotions are welcome, where sacred tears are welcome. And if there's tears, please don't get triggered. That's just our bodies expressing emotion. I created intention to learn and grow together. And especially if this is about anything sexual, this is an area for us to increase our intimacy. Communication is the best form of lubrication. So
Mm.
really allowing that to set the space. I love to set a sacred bubble, even like if you imagine that there's a bubble surrounding you as a couple, and this bubble is in safety. And then you learn the tools. So you learn the mirroring tools. So if, let's say, partner B wants to talk about things that they desire. So partner A would just say, okay, I desire more time with you. I desire your hands on my body. I desire to make out with you with clothes on for at least 10 minutes before we do anything else. And you can get really specific about things that you desire and noticing how that word, how that like creates a delicious energy in the conversation. Instead of saying like, well, you never make out with me anymore.
Yeah.
The differences between that, I desire to make out with you with clothes on, versus you never make out with me anymore. Like there's such a difference in that.
I love you. Yes, because there's such
Yeah.
and even your body language and the way, and you can just
Mm-hmm.
see even parts of ourselves or in others or different versions of ourselves where it's like nobody wants to make out with that.